Hey everybody, it's Friday, March the 1st, 2024, and this is How to Restart a Church, a spin-off podcast where I, Pastor Trey Comstock, and my dear friend and colleague, Pastor Emily Larson, talk about how to make church happen and how to make church happen again. This week, we're going to continue a discussion of a theme that has ended up being at the center of what this show is, and that is the world's view of the church as having, in a real way, disappeared from the role that even the world thinks we should probably be serving. I mean, this was kind of at the heart of last week's discussion of the He Gets Us ads, right? That, a lot of people's reaction to He Gets Us is like, why are you buying Super Bowl ads? Feed the homeless. And I go, I mean, yeah, we should probably feed the homeless. That you look around and realize that, So this comes from, I recently came across the existence of Comment magazine, which has the tagline of public theology for the common good. It is it comes out of like a really thoughtful approach to looking at Christianity and culture and, what can the church be and how can we be better in a modern world, but in a really kind of elevated and scholarly way. I think it ticks a lot of boxes of this is interesting to me. In the editor of Comment magazine is a woman named Anne Snyder. And for their most recent edition, the December 2023 edition, she wrote an editorial to kind of frame the issue called Church, Where Are You? And this article kind of grows out of her reaction to January 6, 2021, and not in the political way, but as she really thought that in this moment of great division, maybe the church, capital C, big C church, could make a statement of unity. And she tried to get something going, and it just didn't work. And that kind of got her spiraling into where are we? Where is the church? And she's a layperson. She's not a pastor. She kind of comes from the kind of writing think tank academia world, not the world of pastoral ministry, which in some ways is really helpful. It's really helpful to hear from some non-pastors every once in a while. Good Lord.
Yes, it is. We hear enough of our own voices.
But I'm going to read two paragraphs that come from towards the end of the piece to kind of help jump into a discussion and use her words to capture her thoughts. I'll stop summarizing her and let her speak for herself. It's a very well written piece. A link to it's in the show notes as well. It's as if the church is the missing puzzle piece for precisely this moment, but she is caught flat-footed, mired in her navel, lacking vision and supernatural power. And so we lay people rove, finding succor to supplement her thin gruel. We experience, quote, thy kingdom come, end quote, God acting in the rigor of our vocations, in monasteries pervaded by silence and prayer, in church-like communities of our own making, in focused reading, and in relationships characterized by boundary-crossing care. We find it in neighbors' needs where sacrifice is required, where the way is demanding yet beautiful. We find it in communities that have required a big yes at cost of a lot of other yeses, that haven't cheapened themselves into yet one more program, one more bit of noise. For despite everything, every cultural nudge that seduces us into thinking that we need lives of optionality to be happy, deep down, we still crave a home that is trustworthy enough, believable enough, vibrant and countercultural enough to lay down our defenses, to be our full selves, and to submit. Sadly, The average North American congregation, at least for the next generation, appears to have ceded that floor. Now, jumping down a couple paragraphs. I want to end with one window of hope. Much of my vocation has been graced by the invitation to see and describe the individual and communal transformation so often seeded by the sacred sector. Rehab communities for addicts and criminals, Christian colleges charting new business models for higher ed, faith-filled police officers reforming the culture of their department and reframing the debate around mental health and racial bias, interventions addressing homelessness that inspire regular people to shelter the unhoused and expand their block's understanding of who a neighbor can be. The examples are legion, present in every region, yet led by people who, while they may be insufficiently nourished by their local place of worship, are nonetheless putting into practice the conviction that the gospel can yet redeem any reality and change our world. These are my heroes, those who give me a picture of a cruciform power and remind me that, for all the church's failures, God is still at work in his people, often in startling and unexpected ways, and that the church is often catching up with with what the Spirit is doing in the world. The question is, should they be more intentionally connected to one another? And under what kind of canopy might they find their public voice? Yeah. I
very convicting.
Yeah, very convicting. I hear in that a chapter of scripture I reflect on often, which is Esther chapter 4. And it is the letter writing episode between Esther and Mordecai. And we remember Esther 4:14 with the, like, you were made for such a time as this. But the other part of that Mordecai's argument is that God is going to accomplish what God is going to accomplish, whether you, Esther, are a part of it or not. But maybe you should step up and do the thing that you were put in this place for. God is going to save God's people, whether you act or not. You, Esther, are not irrelevant, but can make yourself irrelevant because God's going to do what God's going to do. And
so have we done that as a church, right? Yeah. So God is going to redeem God's people. God is redeeming all of creation. So maybe we as the church, capital C church, should get on board and be a part of that redemption work.
Well, it just, you know, I recommend reading the whole article. It's a fairly short read, but it is kind of frames that whole argument far better than I can even summarizing it or reading a couple of selections. But it sets up this, like, that people are finding this thing that they, you know, we've talked about this on the show before. People seem to really need connection and really need the, like, thing that calls on them to be more than they thought that they could be. Right? Yes. That it is not actually like, you know, people long for something more than swiping aimlessly through TikTok, right? Like, rigorous movements are not, I mean, some for positive, some for negative, but rigorous movements are doing just fine in the 21st century, whether it is movements of Christian nationalism or movements for climate justice or a lot of other things in between. Right. But that the church has become this thin gruel, this thing that we are meant to be, is not the place where so many people are finding this. I think about every once in a while I save these articles, and we may do a full episode on this at some point, or I may just bring it in here. But I read about secular churches, and I was walking. I was at the zoo on Thursday morning last week, and as I was coming out of the zoo, on one side of the bridge was the Jehovah's Witnesses that are always there. And then on the other side of the bridge, not quite facing, but catty-cornered to the Jehovah's Witnesses, were people recruiting for a secular community congregation. Like, literally, like, a few people holding a sign for a secular church. And I don't even remember they used the word church, but they definitely, like, used a churchy word. But it is secular, and this is not an uncommon thing. This is something that is growing in power of, like, people want to gather and people want to be called on to be more themselves. And this thing called church has just utterly failed them. and yet they still have these needs. And so, even, you know, these secular congregations popping up, and yeah, there's probably like some, opportunity to make fun of this, but actually I think it is like one of those things back to, we've failed our Esther 4:14 moment. Like, God's going to gather people, whether we step up or not. Maybe we should step up.
Yes. Maybe we should step up and do the thing that we were called to do. And I think that the world has seen that as well, right? Like, the world's opinion on what the church is and what the church does has changed drastically, I think, to, well, those are some nice people and they meet on Sundays, but what good do they actually do, right? One of the metrics that you and I have used, Trey, in looking at churches who are struggling is, okay, if your doors closed tomorrow, would your community even notice? What do you do, right? Like, what difference are you making in the world on the side of justice, on the side of God's kingdom building work? Like, who are you discipling? What are you doing in the world? And if the answer is, they wouldn't really notice except for the people who go here on Sundays, then maybe we need to reevaluate your model of what is happening in your church right now.
Well, and I think this also gets back to the uncomfortable truth for me that I don't necessarily always feel up to, which is the call to actually be good.
Right.
Like, that call,
like maybe we should actually be better than the world around us, right?
And the, like, she calls out, like, this is very incisive piece. Like, she calls out programs. And like,
and as a program director, I feel that.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I was director of programs for many years. Like, I get that. I feel that. Personally, all the fingers pointing this way.
And I think both you and I get to where we are in life, in part. Todd Bolsinger brought this up with us, right? That, like, you get to where you are in life because you were good at not the thing you're being asked to do, right?
Right.
And for you and I, maybe people recognize that we talk good, but I really think that the thing that has forever united you and I is we got to where we are because we're really good at running programs. Like, we are perhaps preternaturally good at running programs.
We can do programs.
Right? Like, if the Mythbusters, I watch Mythbusters, rewatching it with my son again, right? They have 40 years of special effects experience. What we have is 40 years of running programs experience. And you know what, Emily? We're really stinking good at it, right?
We can run some darn programs.
Like, I found myself, this past weekend, doing a memorial service in a very small meeting room of a Holiday Inn Express in Tomball, Texas. And you know what? I ran that thing real good, right? Like, it is just like, it's a high degree of difficulty on that dive. How do you, like, manage a program? And because they've been doing this for 20 years, like, I ran, in some ways, like, your and my friendship and colleagueship is just like, oh man, it is so good to have the old hand sitting next to you who just knows what needs to be done before you even think
and can just run the thing, can just make the trains run on time.
Right.
But we're so much more than that. We're supposed to be so much more than that. Yeah.
So we, like, this is my own, your, I think this,
this is
lumping
us.
you
This
into
is
this,
we.
this is us, right? Of like,
yes.
Yeah, but we think in programs, man. Like,
yes, we do.
That's what I'm so good at.
Because it's been our bread and butter for ministry models for so many years.
It's how we got here, is that we were at a far younger age than most of our peers really good at making, and I think, we have at least strived to make healthy church happen. But, like, darn it, our core skill set is making church happen as a program, to run the programs.
To run the things, yes.
And
we're very good at that.
We're so good. And yet what we are being called upon over and over again in the things that we look at, if we don't think about if we step outside of church world, and certainly step outside of pastor world, what the world seems to be saying is a question that you and I ask ourselves often too, is why aren't we better?
Right. Why aren't we better? Why aren't we doing more? Why aren't we doing better?
Why aren't we doing better? And that doesn't even necessarily mean doing more, But that means, because again, like clearly, like if a program for church growth was gonna save this thing, it would have by now.
Right. It would have done it by now.
But
yeah, I think you're right. So I looked at this article and then I asked the question that Todd Bolsinger asked us to say, after you try every experiment, what do you learn from it? Right. It's not necessarily a pass or a fail. It's so now what did we learn? Right. And I think that she does some good self-reflection in that of what did she learn when she tried to make this, unifying movement happen in light of January 6, 2021. What did we learn? Well, we learned that the church has got some connectional work to do, right? The thing that we are supposed to be the best at,
right,
didn't work, right? So maybe we should be better at that. Why aren't we better?
You and I have both been in a community organizing process here in the East End of Houston through East End communities. And I had another session with that this Saturday, and I've really enjoyed it, and it's really helped us get to know our community better. And we are at this part of the process where a lot of our meetings center on, we've identified some really key challenges. Now, who's going to lead?
Mm-hmm.
And like, I am the one saying, if we thought about talking to the churches, and
right.
I'm like one of the few clergy, I mean, the only clergy in this process. And so in some ways, I guess it's my role, but that rather than like, man, why don't these people think about church? Well, why aren't we leading?
Why aren't we already doing this thing? Right. When the question arose 2 meetings ago of like, okay, we have these resources and we have these people that need the resources. If only there were some, connecting body or congregation of people. And we're sitting, you and I are sitting here in this meeting going, wait, what if we talk to the churches? Like, why aren't the churches already doing this?
But why aren't the churches already doing this? Right.
Why aren't the churches already in this role, fulfilling this role for the people? Right?
I want to be clear.
Why aren't we doing better?
Yeah, I want to be clear. I am not saying, man, why don't they know how churches work? Instead, what I'm saying is we failed.
We did not do our job as a church, and by remaining that bridge, right, between the people and the things that they need.
And it's
our job.
And the specific issue that kind of we're part of the team to work on is issues around housing. And so we exist in the most rapidly gentrifying set of zip codes in the country. That's just the tides that we exist in. And so that means there are a lot of people at risk of losing their homes, not because they're going to get kicked out, but because they're going to be offered a lot of money. They can no longer afford to repair or keep their house because their property taxes are going up. And so they're going to sell out, but then they're leaving their community. That's contributing to the loss of community identity. And so we're in these conversations around housing. And a lot of what we land on is, how do we help older people in our community stay in their homes? Keep their home, make it economically viable for them to keep their homes. And it turns out, and I didn't know this, that there are a ton of resources out there of organizations with real money behind them to help refurbish your home so that you can afford to live there. My dad works for an organization that will build you a wheelchair ramp for free because and also there's community tax incentives for people who are older. Your property tax is kind of capped if you're over 65. And in the state of Texas, by the way. And
but
so
they
now
don't know this.
They don't know this. And then that's where it's really convicting.
Resources at their fingertips.
This is really convicting about the church, because the church, this is one of the places, we're not even trying to reach young people here. This is to modern church's core demographic. And there's a church on every corner here in our area. Yes. And then, as we've talked about before, there's 6 churches on our block. And yet this is not information that I knew, and we're not sharing and connecting our folks to these resources. We're not even truly being the church to the people within our walls.
Right. If we are meant to be this community connection, if we are in the business of people, when we're in the business of relationships with people, and yet we have fundamentally failed at caring for those people who we are already in relationship with.
And then, and then it's not it's still not a program. Unfortunately,
Right.
Trey Comstock, designer of programs. And this is some of the youth group to youth director to young pastor pipeline is just, that is the at least in the United Methodist tradition, so many of our clergy colleagues are people who were youth director colleagues, and then were people who were very active youth friends, right? That is a real
yes.
it's how you and I get work done around here. And that you, at least you're ending up with people who know how to do something. I'm not insulting, that's the world you and I both come from, but it's still not programs. It is this, and I think she calls it out. Again, I can't recommend reading this piece enough. Of what she calls us out for having lost, and I see resonate in our work in the East End communities, is that
church, where are you?
Yeah, church, where are you?
Church, where are you?
We, I think this comes back to our weeks ago discussion on church architecture. Also plays in this. We got really good at being a God box. When, and some of it that we don't like to talk about is one of the things we don't like to talk about in terms of church attendance during the Cold War is, how did you prove you weren't a godless communist? You went to church, right? That some of that gets wrapped up in the politics of the moment that is not, we don't get to coast on that. And so now in this utterly disconnected age, people are clamoring for connection, and they're finding it. And they're finding it in really cool and beautiful ways.
Yeah.
And they're not finding it here.
In sacred spaces outside of the church. But that those sacred spaces are popping up all over organically because people do still crave sacred community connection, but that they're not finding it within the walls of the church. So what do we do?
When I was an undergraduate, back when I was pushing 20, my first semester, I took a class. It was my service learning. I was a service learning, a SHARP scholar, a service learning scholar at the College of William and Mary. And so you had to take your SHARP seminar. And my SHARP seminar was about religion in the public square. And our service learning is we worked alongside religious nonprofits to learn more about the ways that kind of the intersection of religion and nonprofit and whatever. And I didn't know I was going to be a pastor. And I think I just really screwed up filling up the form. I'm not even entirely sure this is the thing I chose. I think this is the thing I ended up in. Anyways, it was really prophetic for what the rest of my life was. And the Lord works in mysterious ways. And so we had to read all of these scholars and about religion in the public square. But one of the things we had to read, that every undergraduate, I guess, had to read at that time, was Robert Putnam's Bowling Alone. And, and it was not framed this way, but it was basically, he's writing in the late 90s, early 2000s. I think he's revised a little bit over time, but the core thesis remains that bowling alone, meaning, well, way fewer people are joining bowling groups. And this becomes predictive of church life too. Fewer people are joining churches. And he blames, again, this is really not entirely pre-internet, but largely pre-internet. He blames cable television and air conditioning, right? So air conditioning meaning he's run. It sounds ridiculous, but he's not wrong. You don't sit down on your front porch and get to know your neighbors,
right?
Because you sit inside. And now you have the TV never ends, and now it really never ends. TikTok never ends,
right? TikTok, all the social medias never end,
and we contribute to this. And
I saw a meme about that. It was, so many of the world's problems would go away if we would all just sit on our front porch snapping green beans with grandma again.
Yeah.
It's that. It's the idea of community there.
And that, sounds nostalgic, and I resist nostalgia in almost every form. But what Robert Putnam's getting at is there is this sense of, a slow and then rapid, and now, now more than 20 years on from his work, almost 20 years on from when I first read his work in the, fall of 2005, that's only accelerated. And
Mm-hmm.
God designed a way for people to be connected, for people to be unified, for important problems to be addressed. God gifted the world the church.
Yes.
Right? And so often, whether we look at, my love of Pew statistics, or, this very incisive and insightful editorial, is we're not doing it.
Right. Church, where are you?
Yeah. If you have an answer to that question, please write in. thegoodnessofgodpod@gmail.com. Or if you, I would love to hear, because it's not like it's happening nowhere. It's just not happening enough. It's not enough of our story. If you have the positive stories of where is the church, goodnessofgodpod@gmail.com. That is the goodnessofgodpod@gmail.com. Everything we do here, the Servants Now Media Lab, is made possible by a generous innovators grant by the Texas Annual Conference of the United Methodist Church. If you want to help us out, like, comment, subscribe, share, leave us 5-star reviews on Apple Podcast, all of that stuff, helps us rise up the algorithm and helps our work get more places, which increases the impact of what we're trying to do in our own small way. And so we deeply appreciate that. If you want more from Servants Now, facebook.com/servantsnow, youtube.com/servantsnow, servantsnow.org are right now the best 3 places to find us. And go in peace to love and serve the Lord. We'll see you next time.